The notification pinged at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I remember the time because I was lying in bed doing something I shouldn't have been doing, calculating my rent for the third time that month, hoping the numbers would somehow reorganize themselves into something less catastrophic. My sister's text came through, 3 emojis and a photo. When I opened it, I saw marble candles, a plate of what looked like sea bass arranged with the kind of precision that costs money. Real money. Then she followed up. Oops, wrong chat lol. I should have let it go. I should have just sent back a laughing emoji and scrolled past. Instead, I zoomed in. That's when I saw the receipt, reflected in the water glass just clear enough to read. $623. At a restaurant I'd been wanting to try for 2 years, but hadn't because I'd done the mental math about 100 times and it never worked. And there was my sister, mid-bite, sending it to someone by accident. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of the dinner. Because of what I realized in the margins of that photo. The revelation wasn't about money. It was about choice. About who in my family was allowed to spend it and who wasn't. This wasn't the first time I'd felt the gap. Looking back, the pattern was so obvious I was almost embarrassed I hadn't named it sooner. 2 years earlier, when I was 24, I'd asked my parents for help with my first car. Nothing fancy. Used Honda. $8,000. I had $5,000 saved. They said no. Not unkindly, but firmly. You have to learn responsibility. You have to make it work yourself. I worked an extra shift every weekend for 8 months. I picked up food delivery gigs at 6 a.m. before my day job. I borrowed $2,000 from my best friend. I got that car. 6 months later, my sister, 2 years younger, got her car as a graduation gift. Not helped with. Not partially funded. Bought outright. A newer model, better condition, no strings attached. When I asked why the difference, my mom said, "Well, your sister's still in school. You're working now. We wanted to help her while she could use it." My sister's not working through school, I'd thought but didn't say. The dinner photo wasn't an accident. It was a confirmation. There was the study abroad program. When I wanted to go junior year, my parents said the money wasn't there. I applied for scholarships, got 3 rejections, finally got one that covered 60%. I went, graduated with debt, paid it off myself over 5 years. My sister studied abroad twice. Sophomore and junior year. Both fully funded. There was the freelance setup. I was trying to build a design business from my apartment. A folding table, a second-hand monitor, a laptop I'd saved for. My parents came by and made gentle suggestions about how I should probably get a real job. Too risky, they said. Not practical. When my sister decided she wanted to try content creation, my parents offered to help her set up a home studio. You need good equipment if you're going to build a brand, my mom said, and they gave her $3,000 for lighting and cameras. When I brought up the difference, politely, I thought, my dad said I was being sensitive and that it was different because my sister's work had more visibility potential. I remember standing in my kitchen, absorbing that. My own parents had just told me that my work was less worth investing in. Not less profitable. Less worthy. The pattern had a rhythm to it. It wasn't aggression. That would have been easier somehow. This was subtle. This was the kind of thing that made me question whether I was being ungrateful. Whether I was the problem for noticing. Whether wanting to be treated equally was actually asking for too much. Every time I felt the sting, I'd find a way to reframe it. She's the youngest, I'd tell myself. They're just trying to help her. You're more independent. You don't need as much. You're stronger. But strength isn't something you're born with. It's something you develop when no one gives you a choice. And I was starting to resent the fact that I'd had to develop so much of it alone. I didn't respond to the accidental text that night. I just kept zooming in and out, like the resolution might change what I was seeing. By morning, I'd made a decision. I was going to ask my parents directly about the financial disparity. Not aggressively. Just clearly. I wanted them to acknowledge it. I called my mom while I was on my lunch break, sitting in my car in a parking lot that smelled like hot asphalt and broken dreams. "Hey honey," she answered. "How's work?" "It's fine. I wanted to ask you about something." The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. I told her about the dinner, about the car, about the study abroad, about the studio equipment. I kept my voice level. I didn't accuse. I just laid out the facts like they were a spreadsheet. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "I don't think that's a fair characterization," she finally said. And then she did something I didn't expect. She got defensive. Not defensive in an angry way. Defensive in the way people get when they're being confronted with something they've justified to themselves so thoroughly that questioning it feels like an attack. She explained that my sister was more vulnerable. That my sister struggled with confidence. That my sister needed more support because she was the younger one, because she was still figuring herself out. And I was just not. I asked. "You've always been so capable," she said. And I realized in that moment that she wasn't praising me. She was explaining why she could neglect me. Why my capability made it okay to withdraw support. Why my strength was a reason to not invest in my future. "So capability is a punishment," I said. "That's not what I meant." But it was. Whether she meant it or not, it was. I dug deeper after that conversation. Not in a vindictive way. More like I was finally giving myself permission to actually look at what had been happening. I went back through my memory like I was investigating a crime scene. I found 7 instances in the past 5 years where my parents had given my sister financial help that they'd explicitly told me they couldn't provide for me. I found evidence that they'd covered some of her credit card debt. Something they'd lectured me about extensively when I'd carried a balance for 3 months. The most damaging thing I found was an email. I wasn't snooping. My mom had forwarded something to me by accident once, and when I was looking for a different message, I saw it in the thread. It was a message from my dad to my mom from last year, saying, "I think we should help with her rent this month. Sister," mentioned she was stressed about money. At that same time, I'd texted my parents asking if they could lend me money for a dental emergency. A crown had cracked. It cost $1,200. They'd said they couldn't help, and I should look into a payment plan. I'd put that crown on a credit card at 19% interest, and spent the next year paying it off. My sister had been helped with rent, money she could have spent anywhere, money with no timeline for repayment. And I'd been told to figure it out. The revelation wasn't that my parents loved me less. I don't think they did. The revelation was that they'd invested in the narrative that I could figure things out on my own, and they'd never questioned whether that narrative was fair. They'd never asked if my competence was a burden I'd accepted because they'd offered no alternative. They'd simply organized the world into those who needed help and those who didn't, and somehow I'd ended up on the wrong side of that division. I didn't plan to confront them all at once, but my sister did something stupid, and it forced my hand. A week after the dinner photo, she texted me a video. She was excited about something and wanted my opinion. It was a clip of a business idea she was thinking about starting, a small online business, something in the coaching space. She was asking if I thought it was viable. I watched the video, and my immediate instinct was to help her. To tell her, yes, it's a good idea, and here's how you should structure it, and here are some technical resources. That's what I do. I'm the sister who solves things. But then I thought, did she ever ask me what my dreams were? Did she ever ask if I needed help starting anything? And if I helped her now, was I just enabling the dynamic where I sacrifice for her, because that's the role I've been assigned? I called her instead of texting back. The idea is good, I said. But before you do this, I need to tell you something. And I need you to listen without getting defensive. She already sounded defensive. Okay. I told her. All of it. Not to hurt her. I want to be clear about that. But because she needed to know that her advantages weren't accidents. They weren't just good luck or different circumstances. They were choices our parents made. And those choices had consequences for me. I told her about the car, about the study abroad, about the studio setup and the rent, and the dozens of smaller moments where I'd been told I needed to be independent while she was being cared for. She didn't respond for a long time. I didn't ask them for those things, she finally said. And that was true. She hadn't. But she'd also never turned them down. Never said, "Actually, let me see if I can do this myself." Never acknowledged the privilege of it. "I know," I said. "But you benefited from them. And I want you to understand what that cost me. Not in a guilt way. In a reality way." "Are you saying this is my fault?" She sounded young suddenly. Smaller. "I'm saying you benefited from a system. And I want you to be aware of it. That's all." We hung up awkwardly. She texted me later that night with a tone I'd never heard from her before. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize. I should have realized. But the confrontation I really needed to have was with my parents. I asked them to come over. My apartment was small, a studio in a neighborhood that wasn't great. And they'd always been subtly uncomfortable in it, like they were waiting for me to fail, so they could tell me I'd made a mistake by not asking for help. We sat at my small kitchen table, the same one I'd worked at for 3 years, and I laid out everything. Not as an accusation. As a request for acknowledgement. "I need you to understand what you did," I said. "Not why you did it. I know why. But what it meant. You told me that I was capable, so I didn't need help. But what that actually meant was that I had to prove my worth through struggle while your other daughter got to prove hers through opportunity. You made competence into something that had to be earned, and you made incompetence into something you solved for. And I spent years thinking there was something wrong with me for being angry about that." My father started to interrupt, to explain, to justify. And I held up my hand. "I'm not finished," I said. "I'm not asking you to fix it. The money's already spent. The opportunities are already gone. I'm asking you to admit that you did this, that it was a choice, and that it mattered." There's a specific kind of silence that happens when people realize they've been seen. Not in a good way necessarily, just really seen. Like all the stories they've told themselves about their own goodness have been gently removed, and they're looking at their actual behavior for the first time. My mother cried. Not dramatically, but the kind of tears that come from actually taking responsibility for something. My father got quiet in a way that suggested he was going to spend a lot of time thinking about what I'd said, and would probably never actually address it in conversation again. "I was so busy watching your sister struggle with her confidence that I didn't notice I was teaching you to struggle with everything else," my mom said finally. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was an acknowledgement. It was her seeing, for maybe the first time, that her good intentions toward my sister had been building a wall between me and the people who were supposed to have my back. Things didn't get better immediately. In some ways they got worse. My sister felt guilty, which meant she started going into overdrive to prove that she could be independent too. She declined help from my parents. She started trying to do everything herself. I watched her struggle with things she didn't need to struggle with, and I felt terrible for creating that situation. But I also felt like it needed to happen. Like everyone needed to actually see what it looked like to not have a safety net. My parents went through a phase of overcompensating. They started offering to help me with things I hadn't asked for. When I'd mention even casually that I needed new work shoes, my mom would immediately offer to buy them. It felt weird. It felt like pity. The harder part was the emotional aftermath. I'd spent so long operating from a place of I don't need anyone. And suddenly that armor was gone. I'd named the thing I'd been avoiding naming for years, and now I had to actually feel it. The anger. The sadness. The sense of time and opportunity that had been lost. I went to therapy, something I probably should have done earlier but couldn't afford to, and my therapist asked me something that shifted everything. Now that you've named what happened, What do you want to do differently? I realized I had a choice. I could let this define my relationship with my family. I could stay angry, set a hard boundary, protect myself by withdrawing. Or I could move forward differently, knowing what I knew, choosing what I wanted to choose. I chose the harder thing. I told my parents that I didn't need them to fix the past, that I needed them to understand that moving forward, the way they treated me had to change. Not in grand gestures, but in the small daily choices. If they were going to help my sister, I needed them to understand what that meant about their priorities. And if they weren't going to help her, then they didn't get to act surprised when I built my life without expecting help from them. Most importantly, I told them that I was going to stop performing competence as a way of managing their guilt. If I needed something, I was going to ask. And I was going to expect to be heard. Over the next 6 months, things shifted in ways that were smaller than I expected but deeper than I could have hoped for. My parents started asking me about my goals. Not in a surface level how's work way, but actually asking, what do I want to do? What would I need to make that happen? My dad even sent me a message once saying, I realize we never really supported your business the way we could have. That's on us. My sister and I had a long conversation about privilege and responsibility. She decided to go back to my parents and have her own conversation about boundaries. It was messy and complicated, and I don't think she fully gets it, but she's trying. And trying matters. But the most important shift was internal. I gave myself permission to need things. For years, I'd operated under the assumption that asking for help was weakness, that being strong meant being self-sufficient, that my worth was measured by what I could do alone. 8 months after the initial confrontation, I had an idea for a project I wanted to start. Something creative. Something that would require some equipment, and time and money I didn't have. I almost didn't tell my parents. The old pattern was so ingrained that asking felt dangerous, like I was violating some unspoken rule. But I told them anyway. I was honest about what I needed and why. My parents didn't fund the entire thing. But they helped. Not because they had to, not as a gesture, but because we'd had a conversation about what they were capable of and what I was capable of, and we'd found a place where both things could exist. What surprised me was that accepting help didn't make me feel weak. It made me feel like I was part of a family instead of performing strength for one. 6 months later, I sent my sister a photo of her own. Not by accident. Intentionally. It was a screenshot from my project, the thing my parents had helped me with. It had just reached a small milestone, nothing huge, but something real. Something I'd built. She texted back, "This is amazing. I'm proud of you." And I realized that's what I'd been waiting for. Not just my parents' acknowledgement, but my sister's. Because she was part of the system too, even if she didn't create it. The thing I've learned from all of this, and I think this might be useful if you've ever felt like you were being held to a different standard than the people around you, is that calling things out doesn't make your family fall apart. It actually makes it possible for something real to be built. For a long time, I thought that bringing up the unfairness would destroy everything. That my parents would be offended, that my sister would hate me, that I'd lose people I loved. And maybe on some level, I did lose something. I lost the ability to pretend everything was fine. I lost the relationship where I was the strong one, and everyone else got to be vulnerable. But I gained something bigger. I gained the possibility of being myself. Not the capable one, not the independent one, just the one who needs things sometimes, who asks for them, who expects to be heard. I still live in that small apartment in a neighborhood that's not great. I still work hard for everything I have. But now I do it because I choose to, not because I think I have to in order to be worthy of love. And when my mom calls and asks how things are going, I don't translate it into, "When are you going to need us?" I just tell her what's true. That's the small moment. That's the thing that changed everything. Not a grand confrontation or a moment of triumph, but the quiet daily choice to be honest about what I need, to trust that being real is better than being strong, And to understand that the people who love you should want to know the actual you, not just the version of you that doesn't burden them. If you're out there somewhere, performing competence as a way of managing other people's guilt, I see you. And it's okay to stop.